in relation to Senator Wall's questions, you might clarify that example that he's given where someone is within 500 metres of the fibre. And what's the technical possibility, first of all, of getting a point-to-point wireless connection from the neighbour, and what's the legal situation in relation to that? And just maybe Dr O'Connor, when he's coming back, he might respond to the last issue that Senator Wall has raised there regarding mobile phone coverage, and give us an update on what in God's name has happened to the mobile phone and broadband task force, which was supposed to be dealing with these particular issues. So I don't know who wants to take the first question.
I maybe start off. In terms of the first question is around the 500 metres and around the technical solutions, and in terms of just, I think you can separate it out from, I think we could give you an answer in terms of the use today in terms of the potential technical solution, but rather than necessarily saying that's a solution that can be applied to a set of circumstances in the National Broadband Plan. In terms of surveys, I think that's you make a very good comment there around the communications, Senator. We want to see areas being surveyed early. We want to see the designs then being developed, because that gives us a confidence that when National Broadband Ireland is ready to move to the next stage, which is making the network ready and tree trimming and unblocking ducts and putting up new poles and then laying fibre, that all of that work is done. So this is preparatory work, but I absolutely accept that it is the case, because of the volume of surveys that have been carried out to date, that surveys have been carried out for premises that won't be connected for a couple of years. And so the communications around that is certainly something we can take away and look at. At a very general level in relation to the areas that are those 500 metres, well, bring it back from 500 metres. So areas which are premises which are adjacent to commercial premises. Some of them just will fall into the category that they will be part of the NBI build, is where the two networks will meet. But some of them will likely be a part of what National Broadband Ireland is considering in terms of it has to deliver the full solution to the contract. And it's gone to a tender and it's engaged with commercial operators around where they could potentially help. So some of that might come into that conversation. In terms of the task force, and I think we can all speak to the task force. I might come back on that later, Chair, in any event. But in terms of the more general point, then on, I'll leave the BCP point to St John to deal with. So maybe on the technical solution, Patrick, maybe first of all before St John.
Yeah, I suppose I guess in any of the NBI rollout, there's always going to be the next premises along the road, when they define an area, they're going to the next premises down the road. We'll see fibres come within a certain distance of me, but obviously can't or isn't going any further. So the main strategy is to make sure MBI can deliver this as quickly and as fast as possible to all premises. In terms of it extending out, they have looked at extending the commercial fibre. Can it be extended out? So that those premises are served. So I think Kieran alluded to it earlier, that they went out to the market to see what solutions there are available, and it was a high level of interest from the market in that, and they've shortlisted down to 5 providers, and they're hopeful that they can run pilots towards that next year where they can extend out the commercial fibre to those premises that are just on the very adjacent premises to the commercial fibre. So that's certainly something that's on the cards that they're trying to investigate, and that includes not just extending existing commercial fibre, but it includes alternative technology as well, so potentially wireless and other technology. So there's definitely a body of work being conducted by the MBI to investigate that. I'm not sure if I covered the point-to-point in that, but from a point-to-point perspective, that is, there are providers in the market today that do provide point-to-point wireless connections, and I know a number of these businesses might rely on that today, or if they don't, they certainly are investigating it if they see that the rollout from MBI is a number of years away.
Yeah,
so
the question I have is, I'll give you a very practical example in my constituency, where there is an older person that has absolutely no interest in connecting to the fibre network. they're on the fibre network. And by line of sight, there is a commercial business that requires broadband within 400 metres by line of sight. Now, it's technically possible to put a point-to-point connection from the back door of that older person's house to the front door of the commercial premises. Is it possible for them, that older person, to buy a 500 megabit contract with Air or some other provider and then provide a wireless connection to their particular premises?
Think about that one. That is.
We look forward to the response coming back to the committee on that one.
Yeah.
Dr. O'Connor, you wanted to come in.
I do. Thanks, Deputy, or thanks, Chair. Yeah, the Senator's raised a good question. So Kildare is probably one of the counties with the fewest BCPs. It only has 3 BCPs, all of which are connected and live at this point. I think our focus is to close off the BCP discovery process, because we've been through at least 2, if not 3 iterations of BCP discovery with the local authorities. So our intention is hopefully to close out that build phase by the end of the year, and that's what we're all working towards collectively here. Now, what we do see, though, is that we have the Connected Hubs call, right? And the Connected Hubs call comes in behind all of these facilities. So one of the things that we are looking at in the context of next year is opening up the BCP network to new BCPs. So we won't necessarily provide them with connectivity, but we will give them a means of getting connectivity. So they can take the benefit from being part of the BCP network. They can have access to all those services that we're going to be running through it, but they'll also then be able to draw down funding via the Connected Hubs call. So therefore, in the first instance, if you have communities that are interested in joining the BCP network, they should approach the broadband officer, and then that's the mechanism that we would see them coming into the network next year.
Thank you. I know Deputy O'Queeve wants to come back in, and if there's any other member that wants to come back in, there's a couple of questions I'd like to ask myself, because I am going into the House later and I wouldn't like you to miss out on those particular questions. Maybe if somebody could respond back and give us an update on what's happening at EU level. The basic high-speed broadband definition at EU level at the moment is 30 megabits per second. Now, none of us believe that that's high-speed broadband. I know that when I was Minister, I pushed hard to get that definition increased to 100 megabits per second. I understand that there is ongoing engagement between the Commission and Member States on this, so if we could be updated on it. And just on a positive aspect, this time last December, when you were in before the committee, I raised the issue of broadband connections to marts around the country, explained the difficulty that marts were having, gave you a list of actually marts that I had identified where there were specific problems. And in fairness, I think you have come up trumps with 11 of them, including our own mart in Castlereagh, which I think is a very positive development, where they have had very poor broadband service there. Can I ask, and I know Mr O'Hoban has referenced this on a number of occasions, that a big part of the problem and the failure to deliver this year has been COVID-19. And as I said in my opening introduction, that the planned build next year is just 800 homes more per month than this year, when the projection is that we won't have the issues of COVID-19. So it just doesn't add up that there's a big problem with COVID-19 this year, and yet we're only able to deliver 800 homes more next year when we don't expect a problem with COVID. Can I ask, not one person, and I've gone through the transcripts from the Public Accounts Committee, I've gone through the transcripts from the Department of Communications, and from the evidence we've heard here this morning, Air doesn't seem to have a problem with COVID-19. It has achieved its make-ready target and gone beyond that for this year. So how is it that one telecommunications company has been able to achieve its targets in terms of the delivery of the National Broadband Plan in relation to the make-ready, despite COVID, and yet National Broadband Ireland, the reason that has been given for that has been the issue of COVID. And just, if COVID has been such a problem in terms of the teams on the ground, Was this ever communicated to the Health Service Executive? Because the Health Service Executive specifically established teams to look at serious infection rates in meat plants. Never once, and I scrutinised this quite in a lot of detail in terms of various outbreaks, never once did I hear of any of the public health teams around the country talking about a problem with telecommunications companies. So if you could clarify that for me. I've received a tweet from an individual here this morning. I'm going to read it out, and if maybe Mr. Neary could respond to it. It says that just finding out that we can't have NBI fibre and a landline telephone. Apparently, NBI connections don't support the two. Our mobile phone reception is not good at home, and we really rely on a landline. So if you could maybe provide an answer in relation to that. On the issue of communications, Mr. Neary, you spoke about the example in Castle Plunkett, and you said, look, the company NBI works on the best information that they have available to them. Now, I furnished to you last week a case, a constituent of mine who this summer received correspondence from NBI stating that they would be connected to the high-speed fibre network by this autumn. And now they've received further communication stating that it will be a further 5 years away, 2026, before they will get it. Now, in this instance, the surveys were completed, the design was completed, and the design had been completed months before they got this particular correspondence. So the best available information to the company was not reflected in the communication to this individual. And this is just one example. I can bring you to communities in South Roscommon, in East Galway and in Mid Roscommon where they have got similar correspondence from NBI. So what exactly is going on with the communications strategy? And just, Mr. Neary, you said that the contractor will go as far as it can where it's technically possible to do so. What is the limit of that technical possibility? I know you have mentioned in terms of SACs and so forth, but what is the technical limit of the actual build-out? This comes back to, I think, the fundamental core of the problem here this morning, is that COVID-19 isn't the single biggest factor that has caused the problems and delays that we have to date. And all we have to do is look at what the Taoiseach said to me last week in the House, and said in the House 2 weeks before that, when he flagged that there was a problem in getting permission to erect poles. Now, that's a problem from local authorities across the country. Now, I received a reply on the 14th of October in response to a parliamentary question regarding the mobile phone and broadband task force, which was specifically established to deal with these particular problems, where there was a lack of connection between the telecoms companies and local authorities and other state and semi-state agencies. Now, bizarrely, that task force sat for the very last time the month before the contract was signed. Now, in that reply of the 14th of October, we were told that there was a joint utilities local authority user form which was being used to address the problems between the local authorities and the contractor. If that's the case, then why did we have a new contract signed between the local authorities and why did we have guidelines issued from the Minister for Housing in August? Why did we have the Minister bringing the planning officers together last May if this particular forum was already working? And why did the CCMA, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. O'Connor, but my understanding is the CCMA have written to the departments asking that the task force be re-established. So they themselves obviously believe there is a problem if they're seeking the re-establishment of a task force that hasn't sat in the last 2 years. Can I also ask the Secretary-General of the Department, in evidence last week before the Public Accounts Committee, said that one of the three original contractors, the UK-based Kelly Group, didn't decide to do work here, and that left us high and dry with the delivery of 140,000 kilometres of cable. How big a factor has been the fact that Kelly Group did not take up that contract, and what action is being taken to recoup some of the costs as a result of that? So the task force, as I say, was abandoned in October of 2019. The contract was signed in November of 2019. The programme for government was published in June 2020 and promised to fast-track the National Broadband Plan. The government's remote working strategy, which stated that they wanted to prioritise the delivery of the broadband plan, was published in January 2021. But the guidelines issued by the Department of Housing only happened 21 months after that to local authorities. 21 months after the contract was signed, 14 months after the commitment was given in the programme for government, and 8 months after the remote working strategy was published. I understand that there is now a new agreement between National Broadband Ireland and AIR in terms of fast-tracking the Make Ready programme. But why has it taken 23 months since the signing of the original contract for this review to take place, considering that 16 months ago a clear commitment was given in the programme for government to look at fast-tracking it, and the remote working strategy was published 10 months ago? And I know that there has been a problem with Irish Rail. I know that fibre cable has gone as far as Irish Rail and won't go under or over the rail line. And I understand that there is now an agreement in place with CIE, 23 months after the contract was signed, 16 months after there was a commitment to fast-track this in the programme for government, and 10 months after the remote working strategy was published. And we now have, in terms of Transport Infrastructure Ireland, a trial taking place out in Blessington in terms of anomalies there in accessing the licensing and infrastructure. 22 months after the contract was signed, 15 months after the commitment in the programme for government, and 9 months after the remote working strategy. So clearly there's a lack of joined-up thinking here between government, state agencies, semi-state bodies and local authorities. And clearly one mechanism that could have dealt with a lot of this was the task force that was specifically established to do that and had been stood down the month before the contract was signed. Now, this is not just me that's coming up with this interpretation. Clearly, the CCMA believes the same thing, or they wouldn't have requested that this be re-established. And the chairman of the Communications Committee last month, Kieran O'Donnell, said it would appear that one of the areas that probably requires a bit of tightening up is to get the road opening and planning licences streamlined through the local authorities. And the answer from National Broadband Ireland is, if a dedicated resources within each local authority could be put in place to handle our licence applications and processes in a timely fashion, it would be of great benefit to us in attempting to complete this plan in less than 7 years. Now, you've been aware of this. You've been aware of the problems for the last 2 years. Why has the task force not been re-established? Why have these issues been left to drag on? And a result of that, 75,000 homes have to wait longer. So if you could address those particular issues, I'd appreciate it, because they are the issues that the public want answers to. And they want to know that there is joined-up thinking right across government departments, agencies and bodies to deliver this, because it is a basic piece of infrastructure that every citizen in this country wants and should have the right to receive as quickly as is humanly possible. Thank you.
given a view on a range of points and asked a number of questions. And I'll try to focus on the questions. I'm going to start from the bottom up really with 2 points. In your opening remark, you referenced COVID and said it was being blamed and used as an excuse. And you've also questioned if COVID was a reason for the delays. I just think I have to deal with that. I have to deal with that up front. COVID was a reason for, the most significant reason, and has had the greatest impact on why the National Broadband Plan is 6 months behind. That's not an excuse. And it's just a reality. We've lived through a pandemic, and it's impacted every business in this state and how it operates. You're absolutely correct. Telecommunications was a service that was allowed to continue through COVID. But Fergal has already outlined some of the issues and challenges around recruitment, mobilisation of key contractors, supply chain and logistic delays. You mentioned the Kelly contractor. And yes, they've been replaced since, but there was an immediate impact of not having one of your key contractors there. There were travel restrictions in Ireland. These people have to be out on the road building networks and surveying. They would normally be staying in hotels and B&Bs. They couldn't. So journey times are longer. The recruitment process took longer. Can you imagine if the group of us here today were to try and do a redesign of something that we're involved in, like NBI was trying to do in terms of designing a network, and you're doing that over Zoom as opposed to at a whiteboard? It was a difficult time. It's not an excuse. And it's not a question of blaming, it's a question of stating it as a reason. It's a matter of fact. COVID has impacted. In terms of when you look to the year ahead, the impact continues because things that didn't happen in that first period impact on timelines for the next period. The number that's there for next year, it's NBI has said 132 to 144. The department will challenge every aspect of what NBI submits to it in the coming weeks in relation to what it can deliver next year. And as Fergal has outlined earlier, where relief is granted, it can be granted, but delays are delays. And I'm not going to offer to prejudge what will come to us and what the outcome of the department's assessment of that will be. But it will be the same as it was for 2021, which was a really, really intensive scrutiny of what NBI had put forward as being the reality of the world that it faced and the challenge that it faced. And I think, you've offered a view that, which actually, I suppose, you've offered a view which I have to defend, and say that the team of people who looked at that from the department did their job, and they did their job well. They had external advisors to assist them where we didn't have the technical or financial or commercial expertise in-house, and then we used the people in-house as well. And I'd have to stand over the job that was done and say they came up with the right decision on that. And they were hard in terms of their engagement and their scrutiny of what was before them, and they will continue to be the same. You've referenced the task force, and you obviously feel quite strongly about the task force, and I know you have a history in relation to its establishment. But when you look back to what was the task force established for, it was very much in advance of the National Broadband Plan. It was when Ireland was in a procurement process for a National Broadband Plan, and there was not a company there to deliver that plan that could engage for itself in terms of what it was going to need to do. That task force was very, very effective. And it delivered over 70 actions over 3 years. It got a much longer life in that period than had been anticipated because the procurement took longer than any of us wanted. The task force last met, you're correct, in saying in October of 2019. And there might be a perception out there that people have done nothing since and the work hasn't continued. It absolutely has. The work of the task force, one of the core issues that the task force focused on was access to infrastructure and the licensing regime with local authorities, development contributions, and it took actions there that were successful. But after the National Broadband Plan contract was signed, the world had now moved to a new place where now we were not talking about doing things in advance of a potential contract that the government might agree to, but we were talking about an implementation of a contract that the government has signed. And like, if you're looking for action, the contract was signed on the 19th of November 2019. One day later, the CCMA had its regular quarterly meetings that we have with the department. And at those meetings, this is where the CEO level of local authorities are meeting with the Secretary General of the department and the Assistant Secretaries responsible for specific areas. There's a 4 or 5 item agenda. One day after the contract was signed, National Broadband Plan was on the agenda for that meeting. And it's been on the agenda for every meeting the department has had with the CCMA since. The colleagues in the Department of Rural and Community Development manage the Telecoms Advisory Group. National Broadband, that group met on the 13th of December 19. It met 9 times in 2020. It met 7 times in 2021, and I think it's meeting tomorrow. Our departments work together through that group. National Broadband Ireland, as you've already heard today, uses that group as an opportunity, as a conduit of information back and forth with the local authorities, where every local authority is represented by the broadband officers. The Section 254 licences were recognised as being a critical issue, and they've been raised by National Broadband Ireland. In the early days of that engagement, we would have been pressing National Broadband Ireland as hard as they might be pressing the state today in terms of its level of performance, in that we were pressing them to make sure they had the team in place with the right skill sets and the right bandwidth to be dealing with every local authority in Ireland, who have a range of other projects coming at them as well. And I believe that today National Broadband Ireland has that team in place, and a combination of the guidance that was developed by the departments working with the LGMA, the CCMA, the Roads Management Office, the broadband officers, our departments consulting, the 2 departments you have here today, but also the Department of Housing involved in bilaterals between the departments. There was extensive engagement there. And that culminated with new guidance being delivered to all local authorities, and Minister Ryan addressing a conference with senior representatives of every local authority in May of last year, just when the build programme is taking off, just at the time when Section 254 applications are going to become live. The numbers of them to date are not as big as they will be in the next year, and that guidance is critical. And since those guidance were put in place, a steering group was put in play, which involves our department, National Broadband Ireland, the CCMA and the RMO, and effectively it's a troubleshooting house for issues that arise, because we know that when you get down to individual areas there will always be unforeseen issues that will arise, but it's a troubleshooting house and it's there to deal with that. So I certainly would have to push back very hard at any contention that the work of the task force hasn't continued. And even when you step outside of the actual broadband space, from May of 2020, the work of the task force, which saw the power of it was that it brought national departments, state bodies, local authorities, telcos, regulators together. That's continued. And when we found ourselves in a pandemic where people without good broadband were going to have to rely on mobile broadband, when we found an immediate spike of 40% plus in voice traffic and 20% in data, and networks potentially could be challenged with it, actions were taken there. Actions were taken there working with the telcos and with Comreg, our department working with them, our department working with the Department of Education across issues in that space. The work that the task force began has been powerful, and the relationship and the collaboration which it has instilled as a way of working in Ireland has continued. In terms of the actual forum itself, the 2 departments are at a very, very advanced stage of developing a work programme to put to the ministers to agree for the next phase of the work of the task force. But the fundamental point I would make here today, that in terms of the National Broadband Plan and the rollout of the National Broadband Plan, there is nothing that would have been achieved with a task force meeting. In fact, the energy that was invested in what I have just described to you and in new engagements, which were more appropriate to circumstances where you had a contract in place rather than a potential for a broadband plan. they have actually been powerful tools in ensuring that we are as far advanced as we are with the plan today. You did raise a number of other questions, I'm conscious, and we need to go back over them. I want to just deal with one of them, and you referenced the EU definition on state aid. We are interested in that, and we're interested in that from the point of view, if we find ourselves in Ireland with the National Broadband Plan complete, with the commercial rollout that I've described to you today complete, and with an ambition of gigabit broadband in Ireland, if there are dots around our country, and how do we deal with them? So we are interested in that. But principally, the issue for Ireland is more the digital compass, which is that gigabit ambition, which is where we're going. The MARTs, I'd welcome your positive commentary around the MARTs. The landline issue, Patrick, you might pick up on the landline issue, and I think that, Fergal, could you speak to the comms strategy? I think I've covered most of your points there, but if we've missed any of them, please come back, and I know you have time in the chamber as well.
So just on the landline issue, obviously NBI are delivering a broadband connection, and it's a high-speed broadband connection of 500 megabits minimum. That can be used by a service provider to provide, say, a voice over IP service, but it's a broadband connection. The fixed line, there's no prohibition from a fixed line from another operator to an individual premises. But it's obviously it's a different service from a different operator. Fixed line, is it?
Just
Yeah.
to clarify for me.
Yeah.
I'm thankfully a fibre user now, but there is no impediment from me to have, as part of my package, and correct me if I'm wrong, voice and broadband and television if I want as well,
Yeah.
on that. Is that correct? That
That's
the
correct.
network can carry that? All right, it may be a different handset that is
Yeah.
required.
That's
Now,
absolutely the same for
my question is this though: is there an issue with the landline number? Can it be transferred over? It is completely portable to the fibre network. So there should be no reason why someone should not be able to take out their copper wire and continue to have a fixed line phone service based on whatever package they purchase from a provider. Is that correct?
I'm pretty sure I will come back to that, but Cameron looked after all the porting of numbers, mobile and fixed. So I understand the landline service is the same as your mobile. You change from Vodafone to 3, you keep your mobile number the same as applies for landlines. What Patrick confirmed there is National Broadband Ireland offer under the contract a voice service as well as a broadband service. Obviously they have to put the fibre cable in first, but once the fibre cable is in there, you can buy a landline service if your retail provider is offering it. What I would question with the person that queried that is, who did they ask to buy the landline service from? The retailer may not have been offering that service, but the majority, there's 23 retailers now selling over NBI's network. The majority of them would offer a landline service and will send them out their own handset. National Broadband Ireland do an in-house service as well for Wi-Fi, but also voice as well. So it's all available, and it's all will be the equivalent to what you would have got over copper, albeit it'll be a lot cheaper, because with the landline, when you only got a voice service, you were paying maybe a rental of 30 or 40 euros a month for just voice. Now you'll pay 30, 40 or 50 euros a month for your broadband and voice. So it will be a much cheaper solution for voice and broadband. Just I'll take up the point on the communication strategy. I mean, it's a difficult one when you're dealing with 540,000 premises, and the issue that National Broadband, I suppose, on the communications front we're faced with is, with the best will in the world, as Kieran said, 99% or 90, probably more, of premises are staying in their deployment areas, and you can send them out feet on the street, people to tell them when it's expected. You can drop them the leaflets to say, here's a survey happening, and they're very clear. If a survey is happening in your area, you're probably at least 12 months away from getting a fibre broadband connection. And they can do all of that, but then these anomalies happen where the infrastructure isn't there in that deployment area, or it makes sense to actually move those few premises into the next deployment area. And then, in fairness to the communications people in National Broadband Ireland, they're pulling their hair out because they just told Johnny Murphy, you're getting it next year, but you're now not getting it until 2 years' time. So it is a problem, but I think Kieran made the point that you can't really bring everything down to the lowest common denominator, whereby if I'm going to have one problem, I'm not going to give anyone communication on when they're going to get it. So we could have last year decided, say nothing to anybody about when they're going to get connected. We all agreed that's not the best outcome. There is 1% maybe of people that would be very frustrated, like the examples you've given us, and that's going to continue, because unfortunately, if we were to solve that problem, the only way to solve it is actually don't tell anybody anything, and that's not a good outcome. So unfortunately, we're going to have to address, I'll bring it back to NBI, and they will work on it. How do we fix that anomaly to diffuse that frustration from a small number of people, and how do you do that while not preventing us telling the mass market what's happening? And it's just it's a problem every utility would happen, because this is by air code. There's 2.3 million of them in the state. It's hard to get every one of them right, and we'll just have to work around that.
But the difficulty in this case, and I have to go into the House now, but the difficulty in this case is that the mapping was done, the survey was done, the build design was done, and yet this family was told that they were going to get it, and they subsequently didn't. And it comes back to the question I asked earlier, Mr. Neary, in relation to the physical limits on the build. Like, what is the difference? Like, this family is less than 500 metres down the road from where the current build completes.
That particular example you gave isn't related to the technical limits it's relating to the infrastructure that's available in the area. So when they did the surveys, they found that the infrastructure is being fed from an exchange in the opposite direction to those particular homes. Nothing to do with the technical reach of the technology or anything like that. It's that the pole and duct infrastructure that's feeding that area is coming from a different location. When they did the high-level design, they assumed it was coming, say, from the east to west. When they actually did the surveys, there's actually the infrastructure isn't there that we anticipated. It's coming from west to east. So, and really it is, like, we've looked at a lot of these, that it is a very small number that are being moved typically in a deployment area, but unfortunately it's the solution, if you want to be more accurate, is you wait till you have that concluded, that analysis concluded, but you're very close then to when the deployment is starting. So really, it's for 99% of the people, it's not going to impact, but there is that 1% that will be, you know.
Thanks. I'm going to ask the Deputy to Mr. Hoban just before I finish. I don't dispute anything you say. I know that COVID-19 was a difficulty, but I do dispute the re-establishment of the task force. I think it would have made a difference, and I'll tell you the key difference it would have made is there would have been a minister leading that task force, which was the case in the past. And as anyone that has been involved in the task force knows, it did make a significant difference in actually moving issues along. That's not an issue for you, it's above your remit, but I just want to put that on the record. Deputy